Hello and welcome to Adobe Live. Apologies for the slight delay there in starting. I'm Spencer Nugent. I'm a product designer and industrial designer specifically based in Salt Lake City, Utah. And yes, it's snowing again. We started out this boot camp with a day of fresh snow in the spring, and here we are again. When will it end? Anyhow, let me know where you're watching from, and I'd love to hear that. So, thanks for hanging with me. The bunch of you who've been here. It's been a wonderful experience talking about product design, concept, presentation, and ideation, and some of the tools that I use in that process. And so today we're going to be wrapping up with some texturing basics. And by that, I mean adding things like backgrounds and realistic materials to our sketches where we might find that necessary as we go. So we're going to talk a little bit more about lighting, about surface finish, and about textures. So once again, I've put together this webpage, sketchaday.com/Adobe Live. We got one person watching from Nigeria. Amazing. Sketchaday.com/Adobe Live. You'll find some bootcamp resources here, a link to my brushes, a couple books, and a recap of each day. So if you're just catching this stream today and you want to start from the beginning or have fun this weekend, you can do that. These thumbnails are all linked to the relevant information. You've got the files here as well, additional links. And today, if we scroll all the way down, I'll be populating after today our files that will be available here, as well as helpful links and videos. Someone asked yesterday how long these files will be up. I'm going to leave them up for about 30 days, so you'll have some chance to access those if you missed the presentation. And so when you click on the links for the files, you'll just get access to my Google Drive here, where you'll see all these files organized by day. So definitely take a minute to take a look at that and see if you can grab those assets. We'll be using some of those assets today as well. So if you are following along, I hope that you'll be able to download those, open them up, and draw with me. All right, let's switch over to Photoshop here. Give me just a sec. All right, we're in a good spot. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't jumping the gun too much. So let me actually, I don't think I uploaded this one, so I'm going to upload this in the background. Let's call it cubes. All right. Cubes 2. Because apparently I have another file called cubes. So I'm just going to upload this in the background to the bootcamp folder for day 4, so that if you want to follow along for this first part, you're totally welcome to. All right. Should be up in just a few seconds. And we're going to start off by looking at textures one way that I like to do them, which is creating them manually. So I'm just going to go ahead and merge these layers because I don't really need to do much different here. So we'll start with this simple cube that we lighted. We talked about light sources, reflected light, and how light hits those surfaces. All right. So I'm just going to use my brush on a new layer, right click, whoops, make sure the brush tool is selected, right click, and you can see here I've got my Sketchaday pencils. And for this portion, it doesn't really matter too much what brush we're going to pick, but we're going to start with something like concrete. How would you make a block out of concrete? I'm just going to use, let's see, which pencil do I feel like using? How about we use this rough pencil? So make this a little bit smaller, and if you pay attention to concrete, there are a few things you're going to see. We're going to see some specks happening, so I might tap the screen a couple times and add those flecks like so. Okay, just kind of randomly texturing like that, and we can kind of do the same thing on the other side. Now, just out of habit, I like to do these things on separate layers so I maintain stability as I go. Just in case I want to do something, I don't have to impact all my layers here. All right, so we got someone from Nigeria. Where else are we watching from, everyone? Let me know. Some people got snow too. I'm not the only one. Oh, Sweden, Nigeria. Awesome, awesome. Okay, so that's a pretty good start. The other thing I might do is I might duplicate that layer and invert the color, so that I have some white in there, okay? And we can just take this and rotate, okay? And just kind of place it over our shape like that. Maybe drop the opacity a little bit. Kind of do the same thing with our little black marks that we've added here. Kind of drop the opacity. And one more thing I like to do if I'm doing something that might be, stone or cement, or this could even pass for speckled plastic. In fact, maybe I'll just keep this and show you real quick. I'm just going to take all these layers and drag them up just so I have a little bit of room here. And we're going to go ahead and take our first cube, little marquee selection around, and oops. Well, actually, I'm going to just duplicate these layers. You'll see why in just a sec. I was going to make my life a little bit easier, so I could just drag these down. Otherwise, I'd have to drag the layers in a really weird way. And of course, I'm running out of space again. Bad habit of mine. So we'll drag this down, and I'm going to get rid of these two. The reason for that is I wanted to show you that you could even take something like this, this cement cube that we have here, and modify it slightly. So on a new layer, if I take a brush and start to add a few cracks in like so, just kind of randomly drawing these cracks in. Take a look at the sidewalk outside. You'll kind of see what tends to happen with concrete. Tends to be little fractures here and there. All right, so we can kind of add these, maybe in a randomized pattern. And then now, right next to the black, I'm going to take this pencil, this brush, and add just a little bit of white. Now, we can always play with the opacity later here, but the idea is to show that these cracks have a little bit of an edge on them. And that's going to help reinforce the 3D look. The same thing goes in product design if you have a separation of materials or parts. If you have two parts coming next to each other, like maybe the door, side door, and a camera, we're going to take a look at that in a little bit. Another way to add texture. All right, it's cool. So we turned plastic. Okay, I'm just going to label these real quick. So we turned something that looks kind of plastic into concrete pretty quickly. All right. So some of texturing is understanding how these things look, how you can replicate. And you might think, well, you're doing this the hard way. Well, I think there's something lovely, something delightful about being able to create textures on the fly. All right. And there are some easier ways I'll show you as well. Now I'm going to take color here. We're going to go, actually, I think what I'll do, we can colorize this a couple ways. Oops. I made a complete copy of the layer and I didn't want to do that. All right, so what I want to do is take this cube and I'm going to duplicate this cube. And now I'm going to go image, adjustments, hue saturation. There you are, hue saturation. And I want to check colorize. When I check colorize, notice that the color of this cube has changed. So I can up the saturation a little bit and play with the hue. And I'm trying to get a blonde looking kind of wood texture here. So this feels pretty good to me. We're going to hit OK. Maybe a little bit orangish. We can take some of the saturation out. Maybe up the brightness a little bit. And go a little bit more yellow. All right, cool. So now what I can do is take my brush and I'm going to use black because that's going to give me some flexibility. And we can certainly play with the opacity. So we're going to try and make some wood grain. And I'm just going to draw some peaks like so and have my grain follow along that pattern, right? So what you want to do is just take a look at a real piece of wood if you get the option or the chance to do that and kind of study what makes that look like wood. We're going to have this repeated grain pattern. We're going to have flex happening as well. Now I'm on a new layer and we can continue here. All right, so maybe this is, oh, actually that's not going to, maybe we just continue these lines and have them meet up since this is the same block of wood. If this were a separate piece of wood that's being attached here, we could completely change the grain pattern, but since I haven't specified that, I'm just going to connect these lines something like so. All right, kind of a nice randomized stroke there. And then on a new layer on the top, I'm going to do a simple curve here, right? This is meant to be indicative. Oops. Indicative of a cross section of the tree. All right, let's keep going. You don't have to get it perfect. We just want to create the impression of that material. All right, so that's kind of strong in terms of the visual appearance there. So we can always drop the opacity of these layers, which is why, again, I wanted to do this on separate layers so that we can have something that looks a little bit better. And similarly, if you wanted to go through the trouble, like we did with the concrete, we can add little flecks of white in here or additional color. And again, the reason I wanted the color on different layers, if we do want to up the saturation and play with that, we can move over here, play with the saturation or the color itself. Ooh, it's a blue piece of wood, right? So it's a combination of texture and color that is giving us that impression. This is indeed a nice block of wood. All right, the next thing I want to kind of show you is how I make something appear shiny, because in product design, we do a lot of shiny products as well. Now, that conversation can get a little bit difficult, if you will, when we deal with more complex shapes and surfaces, but just follow along with me here, and we should be in a good spot. All right, so I'm going to make this cube shiny. Now, when something is shiny, what tends to happen is, and we talked about light sources before, I'm going to move this layer to the top, and let's pick some red here so you can see what I'm doing. And of course, one more time, we'll make our canvas a little bit bigger for instructional purposes, of course. All right, so if we have a light bulb, okay, shining on this surface, well, I guess it would be on the other side. My bad. Let's put this light bulb here. Okay, shining light onto my object. Okay, what may happen is when the light hits the surface, depending on the position of the light, you know, maybe there's some sort of bay light, for example. What I mean by that is fluorescent light tubes. For those of us who grew up with fluorescent lights, okay, maybe that's above too. So what's going to happen is you're going to see reflections of that light source, depending on the orientation, okay, depending on the orientation of this light fixture. Okay, so for illustrative purposes only here, and then stylistically speaking, what I like to do is add some of that in the surface. Okay, so these sections will be white, just kind of showing you what I'm going to do before I do it. And then what happens here in the sides as this becomes shinier is, let's say this is the edge of a table or something, or this cube is sitting on a table, right? What we're going to have happen is this line is going to be reflected into, I'm drawing a circle here. I have a lot of information about this and how you can think about it in my book, by the way. So if you're curious about that, but we're going to have this table kind of reflecting back. So this line and this angle here, I'm drawing an imaginary line where these two meet and then making sure that these two angles are somewhat equal, right? And so now what we're going to see is whatever the color here of the table, it's going to be reflected into the side of that cube. And the same thing would happen on this other side of our cube, okay? So we're going to get some sort of reflection in here. All right, so now that I have these shapes, let's go ahead and make them. I'm just going to use the polygonal lasso tool. And again, like I said, depending on the color of the table, I haven't determined what that is here in this case. But let's go ahead and do it for illustrative purposes, educational purposes. All right, let's say this is sitting on some surface like so. All right, so I've just made a selection there. And I'm going to go ahead and subtract our cube. Or I could just work behind the cubes on a new layer. And let's make this red, just for fun. Just for funsies. All right, so we got a red surface. We got red surface, red lines, maybe a little bit hard to see there. So now, on top, above, a layer above the three cubes here, I'm gonna use my polygonal lasso tool and just kind of highlight these sections like so. And I'm gonna use the same red with the gradient and kind of hit this surface. All right, looks kind of weird, but that's what you'd see with the reflection. All right, same thing on the other side, but we'll do this on a new layer. Oops, do this on a new layer. And if this is confusing, don't worry, I will hide our selection here, or hide the text rather, and you'll kind of see what's happening. So we're getting this color reflecting into the cube. That's what we're trying to show. All right. And I'm going to scale this up just a little bit. And maybe we can clean up our cube a little bit as well. Like the other days, let me know if you have any questions. I'm going to try and pay attention to the screens as I work here. A monumental task, but I'm up for it. All right. Yes, this is all Photoshop. All Photoshop. I'm a product designer. I do a lot of illustration of concepts, and so I just wanted to show a bit of my process and how I work. All right, so the other thing I might want to do if I were making this part of a scene and setting the stage, we talked a little bit about reflections, I believe it was last time, and how they can kind of help in the sketch. We did that on the we used the reflection on the drill that we were working on. I'll show you that in a sec. So if I just take a gradient with a selection like so and drag down, okay, it's starting to feel like a reflection into this red surface. And now I can play with the opacity. Maybe drop that down a little bit. And the other thing I like to do, instead of finishing off the reflection entirely, is just kind of erase a little bit here. So the reflection kind of just blends into the surface. All right, so now I'll take my polygonal lasso tool. I can do this because we talked about shadows as well. So if you're a little confused there, you have that resource. But I can use the polygonal lasso tool because normally I draw with a straight line anyways, and I've made a selection like so, which is representative. Oops, pulled up the animation window. I didn't mean to there. Let's close that. Okay, so on a new layer, you can either use a gradient, right, if you want there to be a little bit of a fade. Okay, it's kind of interesting there. Use a gradient, and we can play with the opacity, or we could just fill in that layer entirely. All right, so the shinier something is, okay, the shinier it is, the more it's going to reflect the environment in that object. This might sound a little bit funny, but one thing I do recommend to my students when I do teach is take a look and pay attention when you go to a public restroom. Look at the pipes and look at the mirrors and see what's being reflected in those stainless steel shiny surfaces. So if our environment is white, for example, we're going to get white being reflected into the side of our cube like so. And just for purposes of showing the three-dimensionality, I'm going to have a little bit of gray there. So we may have some brightness on this side and perhaps on this side too, if the entire environment's white, but I'm going to assume that maybe it's a little bit darker on this side. All right. So that's how I would place reflections in a surface. Carol is asking, shouldn't the gradients be going the opposite direction? Well, what's actually happening here, the way I like to think of it, and that's a fantastic question, thanks for asking. So two things come to mind when I'm trying to show a product concept. One, I'm trying to show the three-dimensionality of the object and work very quickly. And two, I want to create shorthand for showing what's actually happening. So we have a surface here, and even though our light source is coming from the top and to the right, there might be some sort of wall over here. Light's going to hit that wall. It's going to bounce off this surface and eventually interact with our table, right? So in that regard, if I wanted to make this a little bit more realistic even, I just didn't want to and didn't do it right now. But if I want to make this a little bit more realistic, I can take like a big round soft brush here, and we can just kind of hit the surface with a little bit of white. All right, and the reason for that, again, is perhaps the surface here is receiving some of that reflected light that would be bouncing off a wall or some other element in the environment. So fantastic question. And yes, this is shorthand for showing that phenomena that might occur. All right, I don't know what layer I put these arrows on. Hopefully it's nothing too consequential. Okay, cool. So that's why the gradient is facing that way. I probably could fill this one in a little bit more too, but You know, it's something depending on how you want to show it and how you feel about your piece, you can fill in more or less or whatever works for you. All right, so that's how I would create some 3 simple materials. And you can kind of use this technique again if you're looking at something like maybe fabric. You know, what makes fabric look like fabric? If I add some stitches to the edges of this block, for example, maybe I could create something that looks like fabric. All right, so even if I were to duplicate this block and say, let's colorize it, and we'll make it like this blue, up our saturation a bit. Oops, up our saturation a bit. Hit OK. All right, what makes fabric look like fabric? Things like stitches. I'm not sure why my brush tool is misbehaving right now. Okay. All right, we're good. For a second there, I couldn't access my brush tool. So in this case, what I might do is just go ahead and add like a dotted line here, all the way around, like these panels are stitched together. You could draw a straight line and then erase parts of the line too. It's also a way you could do these stitches if you have a hard time being consistent, right? You could do it this way as well. Just depends on how you want to work. I like to do the individual strokes for the stitches, like so, just like that, super quick. All right. I'm always so terrible at my time management when I do these. Apologies. So we're going to move on here in a little bit, and I'll show you a couple files that you can use to follow along. How do you keep track of 4 screens? I just have to remind myself. I've got OBS over to my left. I've got my Photoshop here. I've got a screen that shows me my camera readout. And then I've got my laptop off to a right, interacting with you on the Behance stream and controlling the back end at the same time. So it is a lot. It is a lot. But you know, I do stream on my own YouTube channel as well from time to time. So if you like this kind of stuff and you want to say hi, I'm pretty easy to find online, but I'll be back on Adobe Live, of course, from time to time. And thank you so much for the questions. All right, so I could do something like that. Okay, that's maybe one step. The other step might be adding, for example, just a little bit of white. We can drop the opacity. See if we can get lucky here. Drop the opacity so that it feels like a little bit of highlight is kind of not kissing, but just hitting this surface. And then, you know, maybe I'll add some random polygonal shapes like this to suggest a little bit of creasing. Now, it's a little bit of a stretch because we haven't actually gone through the trouble. Okay, we haven't gone through the trouble of actually changing the shape and profile here of our fabric box. But that's something you'd probably want to do, and you could do that with a simple transform just so that the shape of the object reinforces the material that it's made of. Okay, so I'm going to upload this file as well as a part of today's work. And just to remind and show you, where did we go? I'm going to find this drill here. There we go. I just didn't label it. So this is what we did yesterday. All right. And the other way I like to add texture. Okay. So let's say something is made of plastic, like this drill might largely be made of plastic. Well, right now, if you zoom in, or if we zoom in and look at this, it doesn't really have any variation in it. It doesn't have any sort of texture on the part itself. So a couple things I might do. I'll show you 2 ways here. One is I'm going to go ahead and select this gray silhouette that we created, and right above that layer I'm going to make a new layer. Well, we're up to 47 layers now. Make a new layer, and I'm going to fill that with black. Okay, don't freak out. I'm going to fill that with black, and this is a little bit old school technique, but I really like it. So we're going to go filter, noise, add noise. Okay, and in this panel, I've already set it up because I use this so many times, it's already set. But basically what you want to do is just crank up the noise. You can set it to Gaussian, but you want to make sure it's checked as monochromatic. Okay, hit OK. And now we can play with the layer blending mode. You can either use multiply or screen, depending on which way you want to go with your texture. I'm going to hit multiply. Now we're going to zoom in and adjust the opacity of this layer. So I'm just going to drag this way down. All right, so now I'll turn this on and off so you can see. There it is with texture. There it is without. There it is with. There it is without. And again, this is done under our highlight and shadow core that we created. It's a very subtle thing. Okay, so if you want to dial it up, you can always crank it up as you zoom out. It depends on you know, how textured you want your plastic to look, but that's one way to do it, is to use a noise filter to create and show some relief to that surface. Yeah, we're having some debate about the gradient directions. I'm not sure if you mean the direction as in this line. I'll pause and show you a little bit. So I'm not sure if you mean this right here, this line. Okay. But again, this white that's on the surface is what I'm showing being reflected into the side. Okay. And this could be lighter. I'll agree with you there. That could be lighter. But as far as this angle goes, this is related to the geometry. I guess this should move up too. But this is related to the geometry of the tabletop or surface. To make this a little bit more accurate, I'll just go ahead and erase a portion of the edge here. Whoa. So I'll just erase that. All right. So the idea is that this edge is being reflected into the side of the cube. So hopefully that makes sense. All right. Okay. So that's one way to add that texture, just like that. Another way I like to add texture and spice things up in the presentation and make it more relatable is just by using a simple brush. So again, this is just my brush kit, but there are fantastic, amazing brushes on the Adobe website that you can use to add texture. In fact, I have a few here that I'll show you as well. Let's see. I think it's in my airbrushes. It should be. Okay, there we go. I've got a little spatter brush here that I created. Okay, I actually created this from a speckled banana, believe it or not. All right, so I'm just going to select this green section here, and we're going to use black. And I'm just going to paint this in. All right. Just a little texture there. Like so. Nice large brush. And similar thing, just drop the opacity so that we have a little bit of relief happening. Okay. Or a little bit of texture showing there. So that's one way to quickly add some texture to a sketch. All right. There it is without on the green. And here it is without the texture on the gray. Now it did change the value of the gray. So if you want to, what you can do is say adjust your levels. Oops. Levels on this layer. Okay. We can brighten that up just like that. And now it's not as intense and not as bright as it was before. Okay. All right. So that's one way I like to add texture. All right. So in the folder on the Google Drive for today, all right, I'll show you how to do that again. If you go to sketchaday.com/Adobe Live, it'll pop you into this website here. Scroll down to the last day, day 4 files. If we click on that, all right, it'll bring you right to this folder. And I'm going to be working with the camerasketch.psd file. All right, so I'll open that up here. And thank you for the questions. All right, so this is a camera sketch. Now, I did a bunch of the work for you. So if you want to follow along a little bit, you can just open this file and kind of just use this instead of having to sketch your own thing, right? So kind of like we did before, there's a couple ways to add texture. One is to, you know, and as you think about a product like this, a camera, you may have a metallic texture on top. Okay. Left that a little bit light gray. Maybe this is somewhat of a leathered texture, or you might want to add some other interesting texture. And even then, the barrel of the lens here is fairly smooth. So first thing I may want to do is add a sketch texture. All right. And when I say sketch texture, I mean carefully drawing in things like lines that follow a certain pattern. Okay. So if this is knurled, for example, or grooved, I can just sketch this in real quick, and that's going to help. I'm going to rotate my canvas, make this a little bit easier for me to draw. We covered this earlier, but because we're working digitally, we can just rotate our canvas as we need and just draw at the angle that works best for you. So no need to contort yourself or twist things around just to draw a certain line. We're almost to the finished line here on this texture. Obviously, this takes some time, but when it comes to product design, I do appreciate a nice human touch. That's just how I like to work personally. You could also perhaps do something like this using Adobe Illustrator and then bring that texture in. I know some people were mentioning Illustrator earlier. That's certainly an option, but working entirely in Photoshop, this is how I would go about it. Even then, didn't take too long, and now we have a little bit of texture there on the lens. All right, so on the top here, we have some unfinished sketch lines, which is totally fine, but now I just want to show and focus on adding texture. So we're going to add a metallic texture as well as somewhat of a leathered, knurled, or not knurled, heavier texture for the camera body itself. So if you don't know, now you know. Adobe Stock is a fantastic website. I'm going to go back to the homepage here. I was looking up some leather textures earlier, but what you want to do is go to stock.adobe.com. Under here, you can select free, or if you have a license or you want to license a specific texture, you can do that as well. But I'm just going to search free and we'll look for leather, find something that works. And this one's pretty good, so I'll keep an eye on that. But whatever texture you like, we can pick that. This one's pretty good too. Actually, maybe I'll go ahead and use this. So I'm gonna license that for free. Okay, and it added it to my default library, but I want to add it to a different library here. Let's add it to Adobe Live. Okay, and that should sync across Photoshop. And while that's working, I'm going to also look up some sort of metallic texture that I can use. Let's see. We'll just find one that works for us here. I'm going to go ahead and license that one, and maybe just for kicks, I'll license that mesh because I could use that on another sketch here. But whatever works for you. Or you might want to use something like this, radial brush texture. Okay, that's another thing you can do. So we're going to jump back to Photoshop now. Okay, and in my, let's see, in my program here, I should be able to go to libraries, and this will pop up and populate in just a sec. And I'm going to go scroll down. Well, actually, make sure we're in the right library. I was in my brush library there. So I'm going to go to Adobe Live. I've got some colors that I've used before. Images should pop up. We've got some brushes here. If that doesn't sync, I'll just copy and paste for now. Or maybe it saved it to my Macs. Let's see. I presented Adobe Max as well, so sometimes that's set to be the default library. Because it should pop up here under images. All right, while that's syncing, I'm just going to go ahead and download a copy of this. Let's see. We'll just hit open in Photoshop. My internet might be a little bit slow here. Sorry, I'm working in the background, which is why you can't see that right now. That's stock.adobe.com, and you should be able to get those textures for free. It can't open in my file. It can't open my file. All right, so I'm just gonna do this by cheating. I'm just gonna copy the image and paste into my file. All right. The downside to this is I don't have a fuller resolution image here, but I'm just going to drag this basically over where the top of my camera here in that lighter color is. Okay, I'm going to rotate this slightly, scale it up. And now I know a lot of people like using clipping masks or masks. I don't like using masks so much. Well, I should say I don't like using clipping masks so much, so I'm just going to use a mask. All right. Boom. Now it's masked. If I unlink here, I can move the texture around and adjust that as I need to. All right. And if I place this below where any shading is happening, then that texture is going to take on the lighting characteristics of that geometry. Okay. I found the re-download button. I was feeling a little silly there. Okay. So for some reason I'm not totally syncing with my library, but in the meantime, I'll just download this texture and we'll just drag and drop into Photoshop for our leather portion. All right. Woo, now it came in huge. Look at that. Boom. So when you drag it in, it's bringing it in as a smart object here. Okay. I'm going to scale it to about that big. Hit enter. And I do have a layer here. I do want to point out a layer 8, and this duplicate that are dedicated to this portion of the camera. So with that selected, I'll now make another mask. All right. And I do like to unlink the mask just to make sure that if I need to adjust the texture, I can do that independently of the area there in the file itself. All right. So I'm just going to relink these for now and rearrange just below where we had our shading. And you can see we're carrying that value through on our layer. And now I may want to make some modifications, like say right next to the handle here, as things are starting to get a little obscured. Okay, make a little selection like so. And I'm going to use my gradient and make this a little bit darker and shadowed, just like that. And also my texture is covering a portion I don't want to cover, so I'm just going to erase part of my mask. So this isn't actually erasing the texture, just the mask, so that we have our mounting point. And perhaps we don't want the texture on this front element of the camera. All right. And with a new layer, we can continue to paint on top. So I'm going to use my core highlighter, air highlighter brush here. Oops. And then there's one more cool way to bring textures in that I like to use that I'll show you as well. All right. So as you're shading this, making 3D, think about light source. Okay. Maybe I'll add a little bit of a highlight. Oops. Wrong layer. Okay, let's make a new layer. Maybe I'll add a little bit of a highlight here on our lens as well, just like so. And put that on top. And perhaps a little bit more depth and shadow on the inside of the lens. Okay. All right. So we've added some texture to our camera. Okay. And maybe we don't want the leathery texture everywhere. Maybe just a certain section of the camera here. Oops. I've been saying oops a lot because my polygonal lasso tool, I made a wrong selection there. Okay, cool. So let's go back to our layer here, and I'm just going to fill this in with black. Okay, and that's just going to add to the mask. So now I have a little bit more separation. And just like we did with the drill, we can add a little bit of spatter to the rest of this to texture it, but maintain it being a little bit different. All right. So let's see. I think I did download, after all, my metallic textures. Yeah, so I'm going to use a different one here. So I'll drag this in and use my mask on that and unlink those two. Let me go ahead and delete this layer. So I now have a radial. If I hide my mask, you'll see kind of what I'm talking about. I have this like spun metal finish. Okay. So I can just drag this up to where I want it. And yes, it doesn't follow the geometry perfectly, but that's okay. Because my goal is really just to get that finish in the file so that when I do label the product, we can say, yeah, this is a metallic button of some sort. All right, and now what I might do is just go ahead and fill in these buttons just with some gray. Just like that. And I would go ahead and finish these. All right. So I did want to show you one more way that you can bring textures into your files and help things out. All right. Well, before I do that, and this isn't going to be a completely finished sketch, by the way, but before I do that, I want to show you how you can add like a background to something like this and maybe add some special effects to kind of spice things up just a little bit. Okay. Oh, a lens flare. Good old lens flare filter. So one of the things I like to do if I have a sketch is just by adding a simple shape on the sketch here, just to help separate it from the page. It's a pretty classic product design technique. And let's go ahead and do something fun like this fuchsia color, or if you have an image that's a specific color, you can put that in there. Or if you want to do a gradient or something like that, totally doable. Now, if this is a background, one of the things that you can do to help connect the background to the object. Okay, this is garish. This is extreme, and I probably wouldn't do this with a client necessarily, but I did want to show you the lighting effect that we're after here. So I'm going to take my airbrush. Let's see, where are you? Good old handy crisp highlighter airbrush. And now I'm just going to airbrush on top of the sketch, just on the perimeter here, maybe a little bit here on the top. And also, just going to make a selection here. Also, just kind of airbrush. Need a much bigger airbrush. Just kind of airbrush on the top right there. And our edge right through there. And then I like to play with the blending modes, and we can do like, I believe I always just kind of hover over and see what looks the best. Okay, so if overlay is looking the best, or vivid, or linear light, we can roll with that. I'm going to go with linear light to create a little extra color pop on the top. And now that I'm looking at this, I'm going to soften it a little bit. Soften it right here, just with a little eraser. Okay, but that's just to help connect our background to, didn't need to make a new layer there, connect our background to the product sketch itself. But I would do all of this on a new layer and not paint directly over your sketch, just in case you decide to change your mind. All right, but that's one way you can use a background, for example, to connect the object with a little bit of lighting, just a couple little hints of lighting with that background. All right, so the other way I like to bring texture in, this sketch is also available on that website, sketchaday.com/Adobe Live. But the other way I like to bring texture in is by using the materials panel that's available to you in Photoshop. So it's going to use Substance 3D. I'm just going to merge those layers. It's going to use Substance 3D to create a texture for us. So let's just focus on one part of the backpack. If we have additional time, maybe we'll do another portion here. But I'm going to take this front sketch and just go ahead and paint it with whatever neutral color. I like working with neutral colors to start before I start adding pigment. So I'm just going to paint this in, and maybe we're just focusing on this portion of the backpack right here. So pretty similar flow, right? So again, if you missed day, let's see, that would be day 3. Definitely check it out. And day 2, because I talk about layer organization Even though I'm not labeling all these layers, I do try to conceptually organize how I work. So color below the sketch. I rely on my lines, okay, when working quickly, and then add those highlights on top of all of that. All right, so I've got an area roughed out here for this portion of my bag. And maybe I'm thinking about some sort of material, so I can go to Window, Materials. It'll pop up with a little window here, Adobe Substance Materials. I was looking around earlier, but let's say I want some sort of cloth. Let's see what is available. All right, we got some fabric here. I'm gonna scroll down. Ooh, ripstop. And you can find more materials online as well if you want to use those. But I'm just going to use this ripstop. So ripstop, pardon me. The reason I painted that in is so that I can use this selection. So if I control or command click on the layer, I now have a selection. And now I'm just going to drag or double click on this. And it automatically will mask and apply this material to this region. Now, it's not going to do it in any sort of 3D way. So what I actually have to do is scroll down here and play with those settings. Okay, so I can change the fabric color, I can change the roughness, we can dial down the damage if we want to, okay, because it's kind of ripped up there. So you can play with all these variables. It is taxing my computer right now, so hopefully I can get down to scale it a little bit down here in, let's see, I always forget where this is. I don't use this as often, I will say. Normally I just take a photo texture and I'll put the photo texture in. But you do have a lot of options here. So if you want to offset Y or X or rotate the texture by a certain angle, we can do that as well. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and go back to 0 for my rotation. But what I want to do here is scale this down. All right. So I'm going to scale down that camouflage. You can also change the colors. So if I wanted to throw red in here, okay. And this is where I guess it gets interesting because then you can make whatever custom texture you want. So you're not just relying on a photograph that you might find on Adobe Stock. So whatever works easiest for you, whatever helps you. Oh, that's what we can do. We can up the repeat. So whatever helps you get the results you want faster, that's what I would recommend doing. Whether it's using something like Substance here, we can up our repeat, which will make our texture look a little bit smaller for our bag. All right, that looks kind of weird, but we could use it. You know, we could use that. Or if you're not really feeling that, we can use our gingham texture here. Oops, I double clicked on the wrong texture. Apologies. These bootcamp streams should be available for future viewing. I've linked them on my page specifically. Let's use this what is this, Cartagena something. I've linked them on that website, sketchtoday.com/Adobe Live. So when you click on the thumbnail for the presentation, it'll pop up. All right, cool. Whew. So there we got what is this, mochila fabrics. Beautiful. Very, very beautiful. All right. And let's see. Just seeing if we want to play with anything here. Luminosity. We can bring the texture brightness up a bit. All right, that's looking pretty good, pretty rough. It's a weird texture, but we can roll with it. And now on top of all of this, once I have my texture placed, this is where I start to airbrush or define additional areas in the concept. All right, so hopefully you've had an opportunity to follow along the bootcamp or catch up. You're welcome to catch up as well. Those assets will be there for some time after this stream, about 30 days. So if you want to download any of these files, I will upload these files after today's session and you can check those out. All right, so let's go ahead and light this surface a little bit. Okay, just on the edge here with our selection. I'm going to take some white. Hopefully you're getting the what's the word? The way I'm working here. Okay. All right, I'm going to use overlay to lighten that up. And we may have, a little bit of a bend in the bag here. So I'm going to add a little bit of light here as well with my gradient using overlay. All right. And now on this side, you could do this with the lasso tool. You could also brush it in. It just really depends on how you want to work. I'm going to use like a multiply on this side, or you could use a color burn, either way. All right, and now we've taken that texture that we created using Substance. If you want to go back and modify things, we can do that as well. All right, so we can click on the texture, and again, kind of like we did before. Hold on just a sec. Crank up a random seed, just play with how the textures generate. See what you can kind of have fun and just play with things. Now it's a little bit different, right? It's not the default stock thing. We can play with our colors. Hey, maybe I want, for some reason, maybe I want lime green. Maybe I want that. Throw that in there, see what happens, and watch our texture update in real time. So super awesome, and it's included in this package in Adobe Photoshop. And I believe those Substance textures are available across, like, say, Illustrator as well. So if you do want to use those or save them to your library and use them later, you can do that as well. All right. Green is a little garish for me. So that's certainly one way you can do this. And let's see if we can finish off our bag here. We've got a couple minutes. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks again for the questions earlier. Much appreciated as always. And I'm pretty easy to find online. So if you have questions after the stream as well, feel free to hit me up. But you should have all those resources on that webpage I put together for you at sketchaday.com/Adobe Live. And that'll be separated out into each day. All right. Maybe we want some leather. Okay, let's see what we come up with. Do we have any Substance leather? All right, maybe we don't have any Substance leather. So I'm just going to jump back to stock here. And this one looks pretty good. I'm going to license that. You can't see what I'm doing. I forgot to switch. I'm just picking this leather texture here off to the left, and we're going to use that in our file. All right, so download that since my library wasn't syncing for some reason. Oh no, my download's frozen. Okay, so we'll cheat a little bit. We'll use this leather that we had before. We'll just drag that into place. And we can just color that as needed. All right, cool. My selection should, let's see. Oh, I lost my selection, but that's okay. Won't take much. Won't take much here, especially because it is below our other layer, so I don't have to be as careful on the top. All right. And let's see where this gets us. Okay. There we go. So right below all of that, and we could keep pulling colors in and adding some highlights and whatnot to finish this out. By that, rather than saying whatnot, what I mean is using our airbrush here, my air highlighter crisp. I use this one all the time, but we can continue to shade a little bit to make this feel more 3D. All right. Well, thanks everyone for hanging. Once again, be sure to check out that website, sketchaday.com/Adobe Live, right there. and it'll have all those resources available for you. Thanks for hanging with me this week. Each of these should be linked to each corresponding stream. So if you want to go back and watch that, thanks for posting, Sam. Much appreciated, much love. And I hope to see you again soon here on Adobe Live for perhaps another bootcamp, or we'll see. You never know. I'm all over the place. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a fantastic weekend. I know it's not Friday, but, weekend's coming. So take care, and I'll see y'all later.